On the Bellarine Peninsula, southwest of Melbourne, Victorian graziers Cam Nicholson and Fiona Conroy run merino sheep and Angus cattle.
Soil structure's pretty good on that. You can see the organic material that's in there.
They're also agronomists and have a head start over most farmers in understanding the science behind capturing carbon in agriculture and navigating the language of the carbon market. Words like abatement, sequestering, accuse, insets and offsets, baselines, scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions, permanency, leakage and additionality.
Ask a farmer what their soil organic carbon is, what's their emission intensity in their livestock, what's their sequestration rate in their trees. If that doesn't just roll off the top of the tongue, it's probably not something you should be playing around with just yet.
I'll show you some numbers.
Cam's increasingly sought out as a carbon consultant. Do you come across much buyer's remorse?
Yes.
How often do people tell you, I've already jumped the gun and signed something?
Oh, well, I get, I reckon once a fortnight, I'm probably contacted by someone that is either in the process of potentially signing up for something or already has. And as we talk it through, they're thinking, no one ever told me that. I wish I'd understood that before I'd signed up. So there's confusion with people about what they're actually getting themselves into.
Queensland grazier Karen Penfold is trying to be carbon literate.
So I think the first thing I struggled with was this meta language of carbon, and the first 12 months was just learning what all the words meant.
The Penfolds' home base is Meandarra, 4 hours west of Brisbane. They run 9,000 cattle on 6 properties covering 45,000 hectares.
I've lost count of the people I've spoken to, and I've lost count of the reading and Googling and podcasts. It's been challenging, to say the least. The easy option would be just to ignore the whole thing. Who do I listen to and who do I take my advice from and who do we actually work with?
Australia looks set to have a carbon tax within 18 months.
The time is right and the time is now.
Australia's first carbon pricing system was born in 2012. Successive governments have changed and renamed it, making a complex industry even harder to fathom.
There's a lot of new stuff that you've got to learn and got to get comfortable with. And sometimes I don't think this has been well explained to people, and particularly, there's some speakers out there that don't explain any of this. All they do is say the upside, this is how much money you're going to make out of it.
The Australian Farm Institute's Executive Director Katie McRobert agrees, saying benefits to farmers have been oversold from many angles.
Carbon market in Australia is actually functioning pretty well and pretty sophisticated, but it's not a money tree for Australian farmers.
Are there some sharks out there?
Absolutely. Every market has sharks in it, so you have to be very well aware of who you're talking to and make sure that you've got a trusted relationship with anybody you're dealing with in a market. But that's not just the carbon space, that's any business arrangement in agriculture, right?
Carbon contracts are long, 25 to 100 years, and farmers are legally liable to deliver, even if flood, fire or drought takes out their carbon sequestering trees or carbon-rich soils. Could some people end up signing contracts their children will hate them for?
Absolutely. It's already happened. So yes, being really, really sure of what your obligation is within that contract and your ongoing obligation, because the entire point of carbon sequestration is that it's permanence, right? You're sequestering things back into a system for the long term, very long term. So make sure you have these conversations with your kids and with your business partners before you sign on the dotted line.
I've actually had one person that contacted me and he wanted to sell the land. This is after 7 years of being in a deal, but the way he had his contract signed was that the aggregator who had some of the carbon credits as his payment had to have a say in whether he sold the land or not, which is just unbelievable.
Karen Penfold's overriding concern was not to sign a contract that would disadvantage the next generation.
When you are speaking with consultants, that's it. It's like, what's your clip of the ticket, so to speak? And I suppose as the landowner, you are sort of feeling like you are holding all the risk.
After 2 years of research, Karen worked out their first step was to find out what the enterprise's baseline greenhouse gas emissions were. With the help of a consultant, emissions, including fuel, electricity and fertiliser, as well as cattle numbers, were entered into a carbon calculator. The result was a beef intensity number, which is kilograms of CO2, carbon dioxide, produced per kilo of beef. Was it a good number or a bad number?
No, we were actually really pleasantly surprised by our number.
It's a measure of efficiency, and ever since, they've worked to lower it further. But having a number is one thing, knowing what to do with it is another. Carbon can be sold as Australian Carbon Credit Units, or ACCUs, to the federal government or private buyers. The Clean Energy Regulator administers Australia's ACCU trading scheme through the Emissions Reduction Fund. At the moment, an ACCU, which equals a tonne of CO2 emissions, is worth $35. They can be sold overseas, where Katie McRobert says they're very well regarded.
They're also the only ones that are recognised by the Australian government, which is still your primary purchaser of carbon credits in our systems. So ACCUs would be the best way to go if you wanted to trade credits on an open market, if you ended up with this magical excess carbon that you could participate in a market with.
When carbon credits first emerged as an opportunity for farmers, it was for selling ACCUs. But in recent years, opinion has swung.
Holding on to them is starting to become more popular now that, if you think about all the multinational supply chain companies have set their targets and they average around 30% less by 2030. The day they set that target, the concept of insetting was born. You could say, well, I'm going to generate credits and keep them for myself so that when McDonald's come for a special burger that is methane free, I can use those credits to make my meat methane free.
Professor Richard Eckhart from the University of Melbourne is sometimes known as the grandfather of carbon farming in Australia. He helped develop Australia's carbon accounting tools and advises multinationals and governments. He says the Penfolds ended up making good decisions. Sequestering carbon in soil or trees was ruled out due to low rainfall, so they opted to cut their cattle's methane emissions by putting a roof over their feedlot.
Yes, our intention, we believe, is we will turn off more beef in a shorter period of time for less inputs. Hence, the cattle will be here for a shorter time, hence their emissions will be less.
Despite avoiding methane emissions, they found they couldn't participate in the Australian government's carbon market because a $1 million roof didn't meet the definition of a project.
What's a project? It is undertaking additional work above and beyond what you normally would have done on your farm to improve the carbon sequestration of your farm, to mitigate your own emissions and to probably improve biodiversity and habitat at the same time.
The Clean Energy Regulator has established methodologies for projects, and currently there are none for an emissions-avoiding roof.
Are the rules too strict? I wouldn't say strict, I would say that they're not mature enough to cover the breadth of agricultural production. A fair amount of methodologies available, and there's quite a number of different projects, but it certainly doesn't cover even, a sliver of the gamut of possibilities for Australian farmers.
Katie McRobert's hopeful other methodologies will be developed. Avoiding methane emissions means the Penfolds will still lower their carbon number, which will make their beef more attractive to customers. Professor Eckhart says raising cattle under a roof, providing protection from sun and rain, with consistent feed, puts them in market condition months earlier, meaning that's months of methane they never produced.
The certainty you have in a emissions avoidance is much higher. The risk of those credits is much lower. And the banks are starting to realise the difference between their risk profile in those two markets. Something that is subject to rainfall and has a 25-year maintenance and could affect property prices, or something that you can repeat every year with almost impunity and sell that reduction in methane, because once the accounting's done, that's a credit in perpetuity.
In 2017, the red meat industry set a bold target of being carbon neutral by 2030. The early buzz was about monetising soil carbon through simple changes like growing multi-species pastures and cell grazing, similar to this cattle property at Miriam Vale in central Queensland. It works here because of high rainfall, but advisors are increasingly sharing sobering news about soil carbon.
But for people who are in marginal lands, and that's a lot of Australian farmers, it's really not an option. It's about thinking about what carbon you've taken out of the system for your production and how you can get that back in to keep your system healthy. And that's really your only goal.
And then there is the changing climate.
We know the climate signal in southern Australia is drying out, and we will struggle to maintain today's stocks in soil carbon by 2070.
In good rainfall years, carbon accumulates, which could be sold, but then in drought years, soil carbon often goes backwards.
The idea of monetising soil carbon for short-term gain, that's why you hear the Jigsaw Farms and the Fiona Conroys say, I will never sell it because, well, the risk of losing it is so great.
Fiona Conroy is credited with changing the conversation about carbon with comments she made at a conference 2 years ago.
Somebody asked me if I would consider selling carbon credits, and I said I'd probably rather die than sell carbon credits. So, which was an off-the-cuff comment, but it certainly got a lot of attention.
She and husband Cam Nicholson have taken a conservative approach, choosing to keep the carbon they've been steadily building. With good rainfall, they've put 10% of their farm under trees, which are growing and accumulating carbon. They say their pasture has improved, as has their wool and beef production, which is just good farming practice.
You really can't go hiving off credits and offering them to somebody else, because you may well need to look at what carbon you're sequestering in your business to offset your own emissions. And it's just the idea of selling carbon credits in our position, when we want to potentially position our beef as being low emissions intensity, just seems totally preposterous to somebody like us.
Fiona says choosing to sell or keep your carbon impacts on the next generation.
If you're going to look at succession, have that family discussion, because the ramifications won't just be for you. The whole idea of having a commitment for a long period of time can affect what you do with your business, and it can affect the next generation, but also it could limit what markets you can access in the future.
Like it or not, customers for Australia's food and fibre will care about its carbon footprint. And the output from those farms closest to carbon neutral will be the most sought after. Cam Nicholson predicts it will affect trade.
You know, we've spent 40 years, as I say, trying to pull down and make these freer trade agreements. This is going to be one that's going to ramp that up, I reckon, in the future. And it's going to be harder to argue against, because it's not protectionism, it's actually protecting the planet and protecting the world.
You do hear people saying, oh, this is all rubbish, we don't need to worry about climate change, it's not real. But if it's a trade issue, it's very real, and we've got to respond if we want to have access.
At the Beef Industry's National Expo last year, the explosion in carbon businesses selling advice and measuring devices was evident. Advice about the advice has become an industry in itself. The University of Melbourne offers 1.5-day courses. The federal government has produced a farming outreach program. AgriFutures has released a handbook, and the Australian Farm Institute has an online program. Katie McRobert hopes confused farmers won't ignore the carbon conversation.
By all means, pause participation in a market if you're unsure. Never pause about how to put that carbon back into your system or how to improve your biodiversity, because all of those things will contribute to your own resilience and your own system productivity.
So the rivers of gold have not eventuated yet, and do you think they're not likely to?
They will not eventuate. No, there is no river of gold in the carbon market. There is potentially some gold pieces to be fished out of that river, for sure, but the real river of gold is getting your system more resilient and productive, not necessarily a big paycheck at the end of the year.
Back at the Penfolds Queensland cattle property, their $1 million feedlot roof is doing what it was meant to do, cutting methane emissions.
Not one thing to complain about. It was yummy. That's when I forgot.
Karen and Dan say the next big carbon decisions will be up to their 4 daughters.
And we're the only ones with the country that can actually sequester carbon. So I don't think the world is going to be able to do it without us. And I think we're definitely going to be the ones to lead the way.